boy, how you doing? Yeah, I know my face looks like bad. It's peeling. This is the third peel. So yeah, make sure you comment on what my face looks like worse than normal, right? Well, doesn't hurt or anything, but I think I got most of the damage from the sun reflecting back up off of the water on the boat ride there. So, you know, I knew better than that. It's been many, many, many years before I was on a long boat ride, actually. I'm going to make an important video. I don't know how people will take this, but I find it important to talk about. Of course, I've given a lot of book recommendations, and I've got a really, really good ability to actually determine extremely quickly whether a book's any good or not. And I can always determine very quickly and easily what somebody understands by the stuff that they recommend that you read. But I've mentioned that a million times. Before getting to this, I'd like to mention something really important. And I've done some asking about this. I've been told this by a lot of people. I've confirmed it through 5 different sources, and there's 2 videos of genuine bullion dealers and coin dealers online that are talking about this. They're given absolutely no reasons for it, but they've been debanked. They say, and that's it. These bullion dealers have been kicked to the curb. And I found 5 examples of it. I actually found more than 5, and it's 100% valid. And I talked to a local coin dealer and bullion dealer here in Lexington, Kentucky. His name is Jonathan Kern. I talked to him just a few hours ago to validate this, and he confirms that this is absolutely true. It hasn't happened to him yet, but it's happened to several people that he knows. So this is absolutely real. Make of that what you will. You know, the answer to me is glaringly obvious. But I'll let you make your own determination. The answer I'm not going to speculate on, even though I'm basically 100% certain the reason why. But you tell me your conclusions. Reputable retail bullion and coin resellers are having their bank accounts, they're being kicked to the curb, and no answer whatsoever is being given. And I just had to insert that at the start of this video because it's actually quite important. Nothing is known except through the modality of the knower. If theoretically we were to have one thing, whatever that one thing would be, as I were to witness it and say if a fish were sentient, well, of course fish is sentient, was able to communicate with others, we'd all describe things in different ways. Like we're looking at the same side of a building, one person's looking at the illuminated side, one person's looking at the dark side of the building. We describe it differently, and this of course is due to perspectives and the nature and lexicon and the ways in which our minds, and by minds I mean existential consciousness, works. We'd interpret it differently, and we all have, unfortunately, based upon that, different belief systems, and people argue based upon their lexicon, their knowledge, their consciousness, but also the fact that they identify with their belief systems. That people will argue and yet be talking about and agreeing upon the same thing. It's like this person's looking at the unilluminated side of the building. It's like it's dark and ugly, and the person, I'm looking at the same building you are, but you know, it looks bright and beautiful, so on and so forth. But they're both looking at the same thing from different existential perspectives and different geographic locations. The ancient Pali phrase, which repeats itself many countless times, is that when this is present, that is present. And I can say that, like, you know, I have several jobs examining land, leatherwork, commercial product photography, but I mean, primarily, I am an author and metaphysician. People are like, I want to know, what's a metaphysician? I mean, I've never heard of a metaphysician. Well, many of you actually might have. And I'm only interested in absolute truth for the sake of truth itself, but a lot of people are unfortunately are relativists. They think there's no such thing as absolute truth or fundamental foundation underneath objective phenomena, but there is. And the beauty, like when I was down in Key West and I was floating in the pool at night after the sun had set, and, you know, the palm trees are hanging over the pool, and I was staring up at the stars as I was floating on my back in the pool, and, you know, just engaging in deep thoughts, not meditation deep thoughts would be incorrect. Actually just ruminating upon, engaging in the theurgy, upon the simplicity and divinity of absolutely everything. And a lot of people find the world too complicated, and they're looking at all the minutiae. It's kind of like somebody that's fascinated with the furniture and the, the way, the house is arranged and the feng shui and, what color is it painted and what type of drapes there are and how many rooms and how many bathrooms. Fundamentally, true metaphysics is about understanding the foundation. When you understand the foundation, everything else becomes blatantly unimportant. When you understand the foundation, you understand that objective phenomenon reality is a reflection of this. One metaphysician that I had not talked about, however, I agree he is a genuine master metaphysician, and there are very, very, very few people I can call a master metaphysician, is Emanuel Swedenborg. I actually have one of his primary works here. Very prodigious author. This is his book called Divine Providence. I'm a huge fan of his, but I haven't read any of his stuff in many years. We all actually cleave to different things, but as a true metaphysician and someone that's interested in ultimate truth, and yes, there is such a thing as ultimate truth. I mean, this is the very premise of metaphysics, understanding the foundation of ultimate reality, the substrate under phenomena. Some people are concerned with the sock puppet or the puppet of the ventriloquist. But if you understand, what controls the hand, the impulse that controls the hand, that of course is pulling the strings of the sock puppet or the ventriloquist dummy made out of wood becomes ultimately irrelevant as a crude analogy for genuine metaphysics. Emanuel Swedenborg, along with Meister Eckhart and Jakob Böhme, and one of my top recommended books, and I've had countless thousands of you actually read The Petaphysian by John Scotus Erigena. These people were, most of them were initially scientists, especially Emanuel Swedenborg, but ultimately they understood the futility of trying to fill their head with innumerable objective existential, empirical, i.e. episteme facts, and these of course do not carry after death. Filling your head with episteme or empirical knowledge is one thing, but wisdom is another. This is understanding the foundation, the substrate of the ultimate reality behind objective phenomena, which ultimately are not important. These are the things we actually have to deal with as polarized individuals, and all individuals are polarized, or composed of two selves, the existential persona non grata, i.e. Bob, Sue, or Larry, and their psychophysical constituents and components of forms, feelings, perceptions, impulses, and existential consciousness. But there's a substrate underneath all of this, which is ultimate importance, which of course is the basis of wisdom. Basis of wisdom, of course, is subjective synthesis. It goes by the name theurgy, it goes by the name samadhi, but it means jhana or jayati, which means to burn, but burning away objectivity and coming into closer self-proximity. Just as a very crude analogy, and this has helped people to understand it, there's no such thing as gold purification. I have this rock actually full of gold here that I've shown people before. This one actually has more gold in it. Gold purification doesn't exist, it's extraction. You can say concentration, but when people think of concentration, they will do concentration, and what they will do, unfortunately, is they'll actually try to think their way out of a thinking box. When someone says concentration, they immediately turn to that which everything they grew up with, which is, burning the wood between their ears and thinking about something intently. Well, this is concentration. Well, by definition it is, but this is not theurgy or subjective synthesis, which is what wisdom is self-proximity, and by self-proximity I mean self with a capital S. Trying to get to the point here of ultimate metaphysics, and I wanted to talk a little bit about Emanuel Swedenborg and true metaphysics, which is actually extremely uplifting. I've had so many, and I don't really talk about this because it's nearly impossible to communicate, but the fundamental principle of theurgy or synthesis, and it goes by many different names, right? Samadhi, jhana, synthesis, mineme, which is Platonic recollection, which is completely different than existentialist recollection, is subjective synthesis. And this theurgy is extremely illuminative. And the closer you get to Rome, the fewer the roads there are. It's like, all roads lead to Rome. That's generally a true statement back in the ancient days of the Mediterranean. But the closer you get to the center of Rome, the fewer and the fewer and the fewer the roads are that actually point directly at the center or heart of Rome, which I think is not the Colosseum, and I can't remember the direct center of Rome, but that's not important. And it's just so divinely simple. Absolutely everything that I understand, and being well read is not important. I'm extremely well read, especially on the best metaphysicians on earth. But being able to recite book and verse and what someone's, well, she said and this said, and who cares? I actually ultimately don't care about that. I care about genuine understanding, episteme, empirical knowledge of being able to remember what Swedenborg said, or Meister Eckhart, or Jakob Böhme, or Plotinus. And I know many ancient languages. I know Greek and Romanized Sanskrit, and translating ancient Pali now for 20 years. I can recite book and verse, thousands and thousands of book and verse citations from the Nikayas. And I don't know if you know how big the Nikayas are, but they are absolutely ginormous. But all of these things are reflective of the teacher, and nothing is known except through the modality of the knower. Swedenborg called it correspondence, understanding the principle of necessity, which is an incorrect translation of the Toromananke, but the correct translation means it can't exist any other way. This dual principle, which is not duality at all, because ultimate nature is non-dual, which of course is the cornerstone of Advaita Vedanta, and the two primary texts of its teacher, which is Sri Sankaracharya, whose two primary works, Upadisa Sahasrati and the Vivachudamuni. All true metaphysicians come to the fundamental understanding that there is no duality in nature. A magnet, for example, doesn't have poles. These are the inverse vectors of force. I can actually apply at every stratum of existence and everything that is fundamentally important across the entire universe, not in this world, to understanding the nature of dielectricity and magnetism, this conjugate principle of inertia and acceleration and ultimate rest, and the principles of force. As the ancient Pali phrase goes, when this is present, that is present. We actually have force, i.e. magnetism, and the three-dimensional force vectors thereof. You have something that's a complete inverse of rest and power. The complete inverse of rest and power is impotency. It is space. It is, depression is a wrong word, but it is misery, it is fire, it is the after effect of force, of the dissipation of this energy. Swedenborg, for example, is talking about his symbolic interpretation called correspondence. He actually wrote a few things in his three-volume set of Principe on magnetism, and he's completely correct on magnetism, even though he never ever explains magnetism in full or even much more in part, but what he does say about magnetism is incredibly accurate. I was able to get my hands on a digital search engine for going through some of Swedenborg's, which is extremely voluminous number of works by Swedenborg. He started out as a metaphysician, but at the age of, 57, he turned everything towards the mystical, i.e. metaphysics, and understanding, what is the substrate to phenomena. It's being unconcerned with the head side of the coin and the tail side of the coin, the scientific rigors of existential phenomena, and turning into what is the nature of that which makes up the coinage, i.e. the silver thereof. Swedenborg actually talked about, and other people reference his copious descriptions of him engaging in theurgy, where his breath nearly ceases, and he goes into a theurgic realm of understanding that I've been to many times, and it's absolutely beautiful. You can actually look at ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs and read this, and that's not a lingua franca of the normal populace, but it's actually a metaphysical language of the priests of the day, and you can look at it. And it's the reason why all English translations of ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs by academicians is completely ridiculous. When you read it, it is about 80% nonsensical, but when you actually look at it with a theurgic eye, not a literal eye, you look at it with a different lens, it becomes absolutely amazing. A lot of this stuff is rather hard to communicate, but I'd like to discuss that in this video. I've actually applied this through the lenses of what I've understood, I'm proud to be the first person on earth to fully understand what magnetism is, as the objective exponent of the loss of energy or inertia of the dielectric. It is really the extrinsic force vector of the loss of that energy, because magnetism is the dielectric field. And when you apply this to everything in nature, the principle, i.e. the agathon and the logos, it becomes divinely simple. Light and illumination. Illumination, of course, is a transverse vector. It's actually an incomplete, repeating, reciprocating torus, the transverse electromagnetic that actually makes up the coaxial circuit of light. And we, of course, experience that, but it is illumination and not light itself. And so we, as all human beings do, we see things upside down and backwards. We actually confuse objectivity with subjectivity. And we think, for example, like a nuclear mushroom cloud is energy and is power, but it's actually the impotency of power. Everything in the human world of objective phenomena is a mirage and is upside down and backwards. This is one of the fundamental principles of understanding true simplex metaphysics, is to get to the point of examining and understanding the nature and the whys and the hows of the silver, rather than being fascinated with, you know, the head side of the coin or the tail side of the coin. And I've approached this from, you know, the fundamental forces and principles of power of the universe, which of course is cosmically universal, that being magnetism and dielectricity. Like cathode and anode, principle and attribute. Principle and attribute is no different than talking about light and illumination. Love and hate. There's a reason why, of course, there is power in, I hate to say this, but there is, and people recognize there's power in fueling yourself with hate, but it will burn you up from the inside out, and it is a bottomless pit, and literally the definition of hell. There's a reason why hate is always accurately associated with hell and self-destruction. It is the opposite of rest, it is the opposite of power, it is the opposite of inertia, it is the opposite of, for example, the dielectric relative to magnetism. Everybody is fascinated, and I've experienced this firsthand as owning every book ever written on magnetism. People are fascinated by the field around a magnet and its influences, and, you know, there's this invisible force, and that's accurate because magnetism is the fundamental force. But people have never, there's no person on earth until I wrote that book, I'm not trying to brag, but I'm being accurate here, that has ever understood magnetism and what it is, why it is, and how it is. And people have said, well, I bought this super, super powerful magnet, and yet the field around it is really small, so I must have got gypped. It's like, well, you don't understand. What actually powers a magnet is dielectricity. So you increase the magnetic flux of the magnet, the field around it actually shrinks. The same thing with the pyramidal magnets that I actually have. They're incredibly powerful, up to 1.5 Tesla at the tip. But when you measure them and you lift it just a millimeter from the tip of those pyramidal magnets, it falls off like 95 to 98%. The magnetic flux is incredibly powerful, but when you increase magnetism and you bring it to a point, and this is in the case of the pyramidal magnets, for example, you actually drastically dial up the dielectric effect of rest and inertia, because magnetism is the dielectric. It's like saying ice is the field of water. So we have objective and equaling magnetic, subjective equaling dielectric. One relative to dielectricity, i.e. rest, but its existential attribute, which the Greeks called prohodos, they also too called it ananke, they also too called it the euristos dias, where we actually now have the golden ratio where 1 is to phi is to 1, is no different than fundamentally saying the magnetic relative to the dielectric being representative of 1, and magnetic being representative of phi. But there is a relationship there because 1 is a multiplicative of objective manifestation of the other. And this is my lexicon of expressing, you know, the fundamental principles of the substrate of true non-dual metaphysics, as also too expressed by Swedenborg, Meister Eckhart, Jakob Böhme, John Scotus Erigena, Plotinus, Kumaraswamy, and others. In the case of Swedenborg, for example, he was an astronomer, a mathematician, and a physiologist, a naturalist. As a philosopher, he had no rival at the time. Also to psychology, he did turn ultimately to metaphysics, but he understood the irrelevancy of the minutiae of his extensive studies of objective phenomena, which are boundless and nearly endless. And I've said this a million times. Fundamentally, ultimate reality gets down to the foundation. You don't care about the shutters and the drapes and the furniture and the feng shui and what the floors are made out of, whether it be oak or walnut or teak. All of that stuff regarding the house and objective phenomena is irrelevant. The only thing you need to know is the foundation. Why the foundation is there, how the foundation is, the principles of the foundation, why it was even laid to begin with, why is the foundation the way it is. Everything else becomes an objective phenomena, episteme of irrelevancy, which does not get to either wisdom or rest or true understanding, which is the theurgy of genuine comprehension. Wisdom, once again, is self-proximity, self with a capital S. Everything else is a minutia of phenomena. There is no such thing as a pure consciousness. Okay? Consciousness is consubstantial because it has a beginning in time and an end in time. There's no such thing as gold purification. There's only extraction and concentration. But concentration, not in the sense that every human being, when they hear the English word concentration, implies in their own mind, where they're actually thinking intently and concentrating. It is a concentration of spirit relative to itself, because wisdom is self-proximity. And this is the whole principle behind genuine theurgy and actual metaphysics. And this is the reason why Swedenborg, a brilliant scientist in his own right, turned to ultimate science. Instead of calling metaphysics metaphysics, we should call it substrate science or ultimate science, because it is the quest for ultimate truth. People concern themselves with light and frequency, but they're not talking about light. Frequency is relative to illumination. This is the attribute. All of quantum and all of relativity is based upon, by their own definition, not mine, their understanding of what light is. But everything they think they understand about light is wrong. It's not a wave, it's not a particle, it is not a wave-particle duality. There are no dualities in nature. It doesn't have a speed. It has the hysteresis and a rate of induction. It's nothing moving from point A to point B. It's a disturbance of the medium. It's like, okay, we understand it's a disturbance of the medium. Just the sound is not an emission. Everybody on this earth is also, too, intellectually corrupt in thinking sound is an emission. Emitting sound. Nothing emits sound. You actually create a disturbance in the medium. Nikola Tesla talked about this, saying light is a sound wave in the ether. This really is not science more than it is metaphysics. When you understand what light truly is, then you can actually have an insight into metaphysics. I approached it from a different angle. I actually do understand what light truly is, but I knew that the entire universe was based upon an understanding of what magnetism actually is. This conjugate relationship between the magnetic and the dielectric, which in conjunction make up electricity, by the way. But if you fundamentally understand what magnetism is, which of course is the dielectric field, then you can actually apply that and stamp it across everything objective and subjective in the entire universe, the polarized self. The self is always at war with what is not the self, which is no different than saying the subjective self is at war with the objective self. That what you see in the mirror in the bathroom when you brush your teeth is the objective self. The black of the eye, which actually the unseen seer, that of course, and that's a bit literalized phenomenally, is of course the subjective self, which is transcendent to the psychophysical. There's no such thing. You can't polish a turd any more than you can purify psychophysicality. There's no metaphysics, either Greek, Indian, or Egyptian, that ever talks about polishing the poo or the meat suit that is the psychophysical. So what then is wisdom? We have to differentiate out empirical knowledge, i.e. episteme, from wisdom or gnosis, because the locus of wisdom is antecedent, which means prior to, and this is where we get the Greek word mneme, Platonic recollection, antecedent to the phenomena. In the case of this gold-bearing rock, it would be antecedent to the black matrix. The gold itself is antecedent to that. We're actually interested in taking what is scattered here and making it more concentrated. But when you say concentrated, everybody's brain goes into a lockup, just as in the case of light. When you say light, people never think of light, which is the principle. They think of the attribute, which is illumination. Think about that for a second. Light, illumination, dielectric, magnetic, cathode, anode, love and hate, principle and attribute. What's a duality? It's not a duality because there are no dualities in nature. That's like saying water and ice are a duality. It's a duality. It's like, no, this is the modality of water when it gets cold. It gets solid and it gets hard as a rock. No, 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 it's a duality of water. Like, no, it's not. Light and illumination are not a duality. Illumination is the disturbance or frequency perturbation of the principle. The principle would be dielectric analogously. The attribute would be magnetism analogously. The simplicity of nature, the great horrible, horrible thing, which is actually laughably simple, is that it is so simple, it is so beautiful, it is so divine, it is so amazing, and yet when you try to define it to people, you have to unfortunately use words, which causes problems. People process words differently, they understand words differently, and so you actually have to take them down a little path. You use analogies and all sorts of things. But, I get it! I get it. I get what you were talking about before, dielectricity, magnetism, principle, and attribute, but now I get it. And this, of course, is the fundamental issue of any metaphysician, is actually relating the sublime simplicity of ultimate reality. And these people did it. I actually recommend you getting a hold of this book. This is a great one. I haven't read Swedenborg in quite a long time, his Divine Providence. He's actually an extremely prolific author, but he's a genuine metaphysician. It's the quest for ultimate truth. His symbolic interpretations that he actually called correspondences, he actually talked about the divine being present within all of us. This is, of course, extremely true. He talked about seeing the higher as reflected in nature. I was actually swimming in the pool and thinking about making a video at the time. I was afraid of getting my phone wet, of a light being reflected in the pool, and actually using my hand to disturb the water, and you'd actually see the light flicker and expand. This is no different than monokavinyana, meaning thought and mentation. This is what people do. They think, that's what they think of in concentration. You'd actually ever seen a light reflected in a pool? You see it there when the waters are calm. You stick your hand right near the surface of the water and you jiggle your hand a little bit, and then you see about 100 different lights, even though it's the same light. That's no different than what people do when you use the word concentration. They're sitting there trying to think their way out of a thinking box, and you can't get there. That's not the principle of theurgy. Well, concentration. It's like, yeah, unfortunately, English is why I don't use the word concentration. Because there's no such thing as gold purification. When you actually extract this out, there's about maybe $300 of gold here. You're never purifying gold, you're just making it more self-proximal. And this, of course, is wisdom. And this is the principle of theurgy. And this is the stuff I'm actually interested in as a genuine metaphysician. Whether you think I am or not, I don't care. I am a metaphysician. Whatever that is, or how important that is. Well, I didn't make any money, and there's nobody out there as a metaphysician. There's not many. There's not many. But I am one. And even if I wind up homeless, walking the streets or my land or whatever, the wisdom is more valuable to me than, if I'd learned the stock market or, wound up, all these things that can't take with you past the grave. Anyway, I flapped my lips a little too much. I will shut up now. Thank you so much for watching.